The tower block that the images were made in was called Ferens House, and it was one of the really high-rise blocks. I think it was 22 stories. It had about 122 apartments in it. And it was part of that post-war kind of redevelopment that saw people living in the sky, moving out of kind of low-rise houses. Buildings like Orchard Park, like Ferens House, were new and exciting. They were the future. And it's something about being curious about the legacy of those dreams and those kind of unfulfilled futures and the way that they kind of haunt the present. The council had cleared the building with a view to demolishing it, and then somebody had realized that they couldn't demolish it, even though they'd emptied it, because they'd leased the roof of the building to a mobile phone company for 20 years. And I managed to get access to it through the council. It was really intense, and most of the time I was there on my own. You know, if you can imagine being in a building with 122 apartments, which may be empty, but may not be, and I visited all of the apartments. Whichever apartment I was in, I always had this sense that there were other presences, other people in the building, just out of sight, just somewhere else. Every apartment in the building had been fitted with smoke alarms. So, and you know, in smoke alarms, the batteries run down, they make that little chirruping noise to tell you that the batteries need replacing. So all the time I was in the building, there was this constant soundtrack of, it's like the building was kind of singing to itself. The process that I used to make the Orchard Park images, it's quite unusual and it's quite complex. They are photographs. And in fact, they are photographs of photographs. When I started making the images in the apartments, I was photographing on colour slide film, you know, sort of transparencies that you could project. Those images were very grounded in the everyday, in the little details of people's lives. And I wanted to try and find a way of shifting them away from that, projecting them onto very large panels of wood coated in phosphorescent paint, the kind of safety paint that you find in buildings for when the power fails. And I discovered that if you projected a photograph onto this paint, you got basically a photographic image. These images could only be seen in the dark, completely darkened spaces, and they had a life of about an hour. And as soon as you made these images by projecting them onto the panels, they began to fade. So somebody kind of in the space with them would have the experience where there was a point where they were no longer sure whether they could see the image or whether they could just remember it. That image is rephotographed to create the prints that we see in the gallery, to kind of fix the image in the act of disappearing. So it's 20 years this year since I made the Orchard Park work. And I suppose if I reflect back on them now, one of the things that I'm really struck by is that at the time, I thought that what I was doing was all about what was in the rooms, and it was about the process, it was about the light, it was about looking into the legacy of these lives. And I think now, when I look at them, and I look at them in the context of the other work that I've made, I realize that they're far more autobiographical, that they're actually far more about what I brought to Ferens House, as much as what I found there. And a lot of the work that I've made since, or more recently, has been about silences. And by silences, I mean things that are unspoken or unheard in different relationships or institutions. And it's hard for me now not to see the Orchard Park images as part of that body of work. Even now, when I look at the images, I think they're unsettling. they disturb me. And that's despite living with them for 20 years.